Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Jamie Edwards. I have managed to use my audio snares to snag you and your busy schedule to spend some time talking to me on my podcast. It's been a long road. We've tried many times, but I am delighted to have you on.
Oh, I laugh. I was thinking somehow, and I can't say that it's one of us trying to avoid it, but something's always come up, and I think we have that flexibility of, it's like when you say to a friend, okay, we can't do it, and you don't ask why. It's just, you just know you'll come back to it. So, but we've been doing that for a long time.
We have.
It took one of your colleagues to put a diary date in for both of us to talk about something to get us on the phone together. So yeah, so we're here, and I'm very happy to be here and to be sharing some time with you and your tribe and your audience, and happy Women's Day to all of you as well.
It's good. I agreed, and I was just tweeted something by John Amici. He put out a really good tweet about how, well, I'll let people go and look it up. It's worth checking it out. He's put a great little cartoon together that's quite funny. But yeah, and happy Women's Day to everybody. I think there's I've only recently been able to very conscious that with this podcast that I haven't had enough female coaches on here, but thankfully in the last literally 4 or 5 episodes I've managed to have some really great people on, Sarah Kelleher and Anastasia Long, and they've got some fantastic stories, so worth going back into the back catalogue to see those. However, onward and upwards, we'll talk on the Women's Day side of things. We will talk about one of the many initiatives that you do around supporting women in sport, business and life, but that's a segue to get you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, where do we start? So for those who don't know, so my background is I am a Mancunian by a Northerner, very proud Northerner, but one where people always ask me where am I from, and or where am I based, and I'm based where my suitcase goes.
Yeah. But
that kind of started being on my travels as a former basketballer in another life. So plied my trade in Manchester, started off in Oldham, and applied my trade in Manchester for Manchester United, who many don't know, they used to have a basketball franchise. And so, what I do today is my heritage is being a performance coach with a heritage of working with elite athletes across different sports. But that invariably crosses into a number of areas, stroke business, stroke life. And so, I've had the good fortune to be called upon by some very interesting cats who have had interesting scenarios, not just on the, in the sporting arena, but outside of the sporting arena. And so, yeah, I help people go to another level, and I've had a passion for that for many, many years. And it started in the days of me coaching basketball and being coached basketball from mentors such as Alton Bird, who was one of the, the leading lights, the forerunners of British basketball. And Alton was arguably, depending on who you speak to, but arguably one of the best Americans to come to this country. And I was blessed to be able to be mentored by him at the age of 14 or 15, when he said, Jamie, the difference between you and the next player, and he actually didn't say play, he said you and the next person, is not talent or ability. He said it's how you think. And that, I think you meet people in your life, and they have an effect just by saying one word or one sentence or just being a certain way. And Alton was that person for me from a sporting perspective and life perspective, So yeah, and there were many others as well. I must give credit to Cleve Lewis, who was an American basketball player as well, and was the total opposite character to Alton. So he was very quiet. Alton was very charismatic. Cleve was just unassuming. Alton just filled a room. So, I learned very early. I was very fortunate to have access, and that's something that we will come back to, I'm sure, in this call, is I had access to two great minds.
And so obviously that, I guess, set you on a bit of a journey around performance and all those sorts of things. But one of the things that you talk about, I've heard you talk about a lot, is you often write, one of the first things you write when you do workshops, and I have been privileged to attend many, some of which have been, at my behest, others I've come along to and what have you. One of the things you do is, you write using your now famous, very big, fat whiteboard markers or flip chart markers, which I love.
They are quite famous, those, aren't they?
6 foot 5, don't you, as a starting point?
I do. So I was 6'5" in another life, and visually, if you saw me, then you would know that I'm not 6'5", and some people actually think, well, what happened? And but I do say I was 6'5". Well, actually, I'm 5'6", but I just used to turn the numbers around, and and that's very true. I did. I used to believe that I was 6'5" and walk as though I was 6'5", and I came across many basketball players and people who were way taller, and that was my first introduction to mental training. It was like a small shift, and that was always drilled into me, is that you are not 5'6", physically, yes, but mentally there's so much more, and it was really interesting. And I guess my first mental coach, and it's probably the celebration of Women's Day as well, my very first mental coach was my mum.
Yeah.
And my mum, who just thinking about her now, is she instilled in me this mindset, this attitude that I grew up in Manchester, in the city, a mile away from the city centre, and she said to me, you have to be 2 steps ahead, because if you're 1 step ahead, and they catch up with you, 2 steps, they take 1 step, and you're always a step ahead. And she was saying that from the perspective of being a single mom of a young black man who, in the centre of Manchester, where most of my primary school friends ended up in some kind of trouble or, behind bars. And, I remember her sending me to see my aunt in America, and it's a story that always, pops up. And we've just talked about this. You said, why are you changing your jumper, Jamie? And but this was, again, you talk about people having this impact at an early age, and she would always make sure that I was immaculately dressed. And she sent me to New York on a flight on my own at 8 years old in the height of summer. And I open the doors open of the plane, and it's like, God knows, 100 in New York. And I'm in a 3-piece tweed Burton suit at 8 years old. And my aunt said, Lord, what has your mother sent you in? But it was like I was getting off and going to a business meeting at 8 years old. So, she was definitely my first mental coach. Yeah.
So you talked a lot, you described yourself, I think, as right at the outset here, as a performance coach. And I mean, I think that's a really good way of describing a little bit about what you do, because it's not, I don't think it's easy to describe it. And I will at some point get you to describe what you do, because it'd be interesting to hear that. But from my perspective, I think it's a pretty good description. Although I think what a lot of people would probably think of when they hear you say performance coach, they think of people in the kind of elite space. And whilst that is a part and a fairly major part of what you do, it certainly isn't where you only would operate. And actually, in many cases, your long held, I think, passion is to try and do far more earlier in people's lives to help them with the journey that they're on, et cetera, et cetera. And I know you do an awful lot of that as well. So I wanted to disabuse everybody of this idea that, a performance coach works in a performance context, because the principles and the approaches and the concepts and ideas that you I guess engage people on apply in a range of different contexts, and can apply in a range, and I can attest to this, and I will attest to this as we move forward. But I'd be interested just to come back to that point around, firstly, different contexts, and secondly, this idea of kind of how you interact with people and the kind of engagement that you have.
Well, I think, Stuart, people are always interested in when you start a conversation, or I'm kind of at a dinner party, or I was at a birthday party last night, and people want, the first question people do is when they meet people, it's habitual. They say, "What do you do?" It's not my favorite question to be asked, because I'd rather we got to know who we were rather than what we were, professionally. And so for me, performance coach is the first thing that people think is the elite. And, my passion, as you said, has always been to give people the skills, the tools before they even think that they need them. And that came from, again, purely because I had mentors at a very early age who invested time, or said, this is a way, or they showed me a way. And so for me, performance isn't elite. Performance is, can we help the individual go to a different level? So it doesn't have to be you play in the Premier League. It doesn't have to be, you're playing in the Ashes or at the highest levels of what you do. It's can I get more out of myself in a context? And that's where, I'll show, in a couple of hours, I'm going to have a coffee, and I'm smiling because, that has its own context as well. But I'm going to go and have a coffee with a young woman who's been struggling, and she rides dressage, and she but we're not even talking about the horses and that performance. We're talking about performance in life. And so, for me, performance coach isn't just sports. It isn't just business. It's life. And I think when, before there was this emphasis on sports, but actually, if one thing I love the work of life coaches, but again, we're kind of zigging and zagging here, and we will do, because that's the nature of our conversations. But when people say, are you a life coach? Well, for many years, I didn't like that phrase, being labeled a life coach, because it has, again, preconceived ideas and also the reactions to it. If you say to somebody, you're a psychiatrist, a psychologist, if you say to somebody you're a bin man, if you say to somebody you're a Premiership footballer, all of a sudden people have this, it starts shifting their beliefs about what you are. And so when somebody would say, oh, life coach, I would go, no, I'm not a life coach. And that was, and I love the work that life coaches do. But for me, it was, no, you pigeonholing me into this. And so I always get as well, are you the motivation guy? I'm like, no, I'm not the motivation guy either. Because motivation is very short term. It's like I say, it's like jumping in a bath, a hot bath. If you jump in a hot bath, you'll jump right back out again. So I think the word performance, you can perform in school, you can perform making your favorite meal, you can perform as a father, you can perform as a husband or wife. So performance is, we're all performing.
Exactly. And so from that perspective, I wanted to just dwell on a little bit. So I think one of the interesting things about, I guess, working with you, and so I probably go back a step, right? So, oh God, how long ago was it now? 4-5 years ago? Long enough, anyway. Too long.
Are we talking about retreat?
Retreat, yeah.
Yeah. 4 years. 4 years ago, maybe 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So 4 or 5 years ago, when I was working in rugby, a team of guys working with me, really great people.
Great guys.
Yeah.
Great guys.
And very, very committed, very dedicated, etc., etc. And all of us, we all experienced challenges in the roles that we had, because we were trying to bring about change. We were trying to help to improve experiences and change people's minds around the nature of the participation experience. And it was an uphill battle, because there's tradition and there's there's limiting beliefs and all sorts of things. So anyway, I bought them a Christmas present as their manager. And I'm not sure they particularly viewed it as a Christmas present when I first told them, but I said, right, your Christmas present is on the, the kind of almost first thing back from
First week of January.
We're going to spend 3 days in the Lake District of in the north of the UK, which is pretty remote, no mobile phone signal, and we're going to live together with this crazy dude called Jamie Edwards and a load of other coaches, and we're going to do this, have this experience. And they were all, I bet they all literally looked at me and went, well, by that point, actually, they knew enough about me to know that, this is pretty normal stuff with me, actually, because I will often do this kind of thing. Anyway, I said, right, so we're going to spend the time. And we had a lot of things came out of that weekend, which we can explore and talk about. But the one thing that came about for me was I went there really to try and, I guess, a couple of things really. One was to connect with them partly, also to increase and deepen my connections with them. The other thing I went there for really was to, improve myself as well as a manager, and also to explore, some stuff around coaching, because obviously it's a passion of mine. But the interesting thing was the other things that I got from the weekend. Well, it wasn't a weekend; it was a week, wasn't it?
3 days.
Yeah. I think was the other thing.
3 days.
Yeah, I came home, and and this is, like the ultimate accolade, I think. And my wife said to me after about, 2 or 3 hours of being home, she went, "What's wrong with you? You're like husband 2.0." Which I obviously told you about. And it was like, and it goes back to what you say when you talk about, it's not just about sport, it's not just about business, it's also about life. Because the kind of byproduct is that I'd had a kind of, I guess I'd had a change of mindset, or I'd had a different perspective on the way I was acting in the world that I'd not previously considered, which was pretty humbling and pretty it genuinely made me feel as if, like, oh my God, what the hell?
Why had you not considered that?
Because I guess you live in your own little world and your bubble, and you need your perspective to be shifted. And what you did was shifted my perspective. Mm-hmm. And I got to see things through a different lens. We'll use the word lens a lot. Mm-hmm. And through a different lens, I was able to, I guess, almost take myself out of myself, look at the way I was acting in the world, and then reconsider how I would like to act in the world. And it just completely changed things, and it stayed with me to this day. And I've passed it on to other people. I had an experience recently with a family member where that same idea about a shift of perspective became so useful and so powerful. Anyway, that was a great experience.
Okay, so and I think first of all, if we're rewinding, a great gift to your team. But I think the one thing that they had in you was trust and faith. That you didn't know what, and whilst we've known each other for many years, you still did not know what you were coming to.
No, I'd never done the retreat. We talked about it, but never done it.
Yeah, exactly. And there are many who have done it. It's not something that I always made readily available for different reasons. But I think the two words that I've just jotted down there, and it's what your guys had in you, is trust and faith. And you had that in me, trust and faith. And I always say that if we're talking about performance and the relationship between two people, not the relationship between coach and coachee, but the relationship between two people fundamentally comes down to trust and faith. The trust that, have you got my best interests at heart? And the faith is you don't know what is going to happen, but it's something in the future. It's belief without knowing. Yeah. Belief without knowing. Yeah. And I think your team had that with you. You had that with me. Who says, just turn up. And I really believe that successful people in their world, they will, if somebody says to you, just turn up, it'll be okay. And you trust that person, then you go. And I've had that number of times in my career and my life. And I'm thinking, somebody's coming to mind right now, a very good friend of mine. He's a cancer surgeon. And I work with a group of girls. We'll talk about that later on, I'm sure. And the school was a bit, we've got to do this. We've got to go through this process. And Dev just called the head. He's a trustee of the school. And he just called the head and said, just send the girls. Just send them. And in that moment, then the head has that relationship with Dev. She has trust in his judgment. She has faith in that, and vice versa. And that's what I think is really important in terms of we're getting there in terms of performance. For an influence is, do you have trust in the person, and do you have faith in what they're doing? So I think that was one factor before, because I'm sure people are saying, so what was it that you were doing there? The second factor, I think, for you guys is that I took you out of the environment. I took you out of your normal environment. And environment is very important. You know, you're in your home, you're in your workplace. They are familiar environments. And sometimes to instigate change, you have to change the environment. So it doesn't always have to be, but from, you know, there's lots of research that, you know, when you say, well, we're bringing somebody from the outside to speak to the team, very often I'm saying the same thing that the coach is saying, that the parent's saying, that the business leader's saying, but I'm saying it in a different way, in a different voice. So it's a different person. But there's research that says if you just take your team or the person into a different environment, then change also starts to happen. And so we had those two factors, environment, trust and faith. And then the other one is complete like immersion of, you know, you're not going anywhere and we're going to do this in the room.
Yeah.
So we're going to make the change in the room. We're not going to say, okay, here's some nice information. Now go home and then go and apply it. We say, no, you're going to stay. You've got no mobile phone signal and we're going to make the changes here.
And that was one of the interesting, you talk about environment and the influences, the constraints placed by the environment were very important, actually, the more you think about it, because it meant that when we were outside of the kind of formal sessions, so to speak, you know, the conversation continued. People didn't retreat into their devices and, you know, go and do emails and all that sort of, you couldn't. So, you know, a lot, you know, we ate together, we cooked together, we, you know, there was breakout conversations, people went for walks, and there was, you know, so that kind of additionally enriched value that came from the actual physical environment, plus the fact that it was, you know, very much, you know, embedded in nature, and therefore, you know, you got literally nature all around you, and the kind of well-being that comes from being like bathing in nature. There's a you know, that kind of idea. All of that very, very important. More probably important now I look back on it than I probably realized at the time.
I think the phrase I always say, it's the message without the message. It's the message without the message, and very often, you know, people will say, well, tell me what it is. You know, tell me what it is. Tell me what I'm getting, because they want to know. And, you know, that's the world. You want to know. You want to, you know, whilst people say they don't want to be marketed to, well, if you want to know, then there's got to be some kind of marketing to that. And actually, in my experience, it's more powerful when you go with those two things of trust and faith.
Yeah.
Because the uncertainty that it creates is then you're going to somewhere where all of a sudden you're going to see people and you're going to, you know, the mind starts saying, actually, I'm going to be okay. This is going to be okay. And that's part of the process. And I remember saying to you, because I think people are still saying, well, okay, so, you know, how does, you know, why are you, you know, why come away with me? And we'll get to that. We've not even talked about the people who I help or help shift perspectives. And I think at this point, it's not that important. But I think what's more important for me, for people to get to take from this, is that if you look back in your life, there are times when you have had trust in yourself and you've placed faith in yourself and you've placed trust in somebody else and you've made a decision, and that has led to something else. It's led to, you know, you taking a job. It's led to, you know, if you're married, you know, think about how you connected. You know, there was, you know, somebody introduced you to somebody, or you went to an event and you managed to meet somebody. You placed, you know, trust and faith in the situation or the person. And if you go throughout your life there will be lots of scenarios of that. And what I like to do with those two contexts is reconnect people to them. Trust in yourself and faith that it's going to be okay.
And the other thing about that as well is the fact
but you have to practice it, Stuart. That's what I'm saying. You have to practice it beyond a concept.
Yes, you're right. And the thing about it as well is the not knowing is also pretty important in many ways, because there's also an openness and a vulnerability. You can't have any preconception. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the amount of times I've been to something with a bit of preconception, whether I'm aware of it or not. And that's quite important then, because it means people arrive, I guess, far more ready to have an experience, because they don't actually know what the experience is going to be. They can't put defense mechanisms up. Actually, talking of defense mechanisms, talking to my wife about this the other day. In fact, I think I did it with one of my children. Didn't work, by the way, which was interesting. Something you did with one of my colleagues was you were asking him a question, didn't you? And he the sort of the defense mechanism went up. And he said, oh, you ask him some question. He goes, and he just looked, and he was like, it was almost like the defense mechanism was, right, I don't want to think about this, or I don't want to do it. And he said, I don't know. And you said, what would you, if you did know, what would you say? And he answered. It was so brilliant. Anyway, but that was an interesting.
We'll come back to that.
About defense mechanisms and things like that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. There's a skill or tool or reason for that, isn't there? Because when very often people will put the resistance up, and their default answer is I don't know, and the reality is they do know. But that's maybe we'll get into that as well.
They do know, or they do know, and they don't want to tell you. Mm-hmm. They don't want to think about it enough to be able to give you an answer. So that's easy. I mean, a lot of the coaches who listen to this will have experienced this when you're working with young people and you pose a question to somebody, and they
you're working with people, not young people.
Well, yes, but in the context of my audience, it's often working with young people. And they'll often say, young people say, I don't know. And then they, you're like, oh, well, what do I do with that? So actually it's an interesting tool to use to just ask somebody a kind of slightly different question, which is to say, well, if you did know, what would you say? And I have done that on occasions. And sometimes it's usually a slight moment of levity because people actually look at you sideways. What kind of question is that? But then that stimulates a different kind of conversation. And then we start to have a flow. So it's quite an interesting tool just for people to use, because I always like people to have the odd practical takeaway in our conversations.
Well, I think so the default answer is, I don't know. And, you might come across somebody who says, well, if I did know the answer, I would tell you. And then I say, well, just imagine that you did know the answer. What would you say if you did know the answer?
Yeah.
And so we're talking about language here, and I think it's a good time to share with the audience that, one of the key skills or tools for me is the chats and conversations. And I think probably, Stuart, at this point, I'm feeling that give people a context of the kind of areas and specific people that I work with, because, otherwise, we will zig and zag, because that's what, and I think that's very often people think life is a straight line, sports is a straight line, and zig and zag. As I said to a group of students the other day, getting ready for their year 11 exams, is that life isn't a straight line. Now, again, as a concept, people know that, but actually practicing being ready for it not being a straight line is completely different. And so, as I said, my background, my heritage is working with elite athletes, but who can already play.
Yeah.
They can already perform, technically, but something usually gets in the way. And, many years ago, even though I've been at this a long time, but people always ask me, who's your most high profile person that you've worked with? And I guess it's not so much high profile, sometimes it's a combination of pressure scenarios, and pressure scenarios doesn't have to be high profile elite person, as you've just recently experienced. So, the Ashes 2005, when I got a call from Andrew Flintoff's agent, and, people, didn't know at the time. They saw the world beater, the man of the series, at the end of that series, world player of the year. But the person that I met after the Lord's test, had lost his confidence and lost belief just because of one poor performance, because of expectations and pressure. And, Andrew is well documented about his challenges with mental health, and I'm sure we'll get into that later on as well. But for me, it was he cancelled our first session, our first meeting, not session, our first meeting 5 minutes before we were meant to meet, because he wanted to get back in the nets and work on his technique. Now, we know if you're going into the biggest event of your life, we know it can't be technique, because you've already trained that. And so when somebody is introduced to me, especially in that type of situation, I don't think we have time to chat. And my builder taught me the best tool, and I think it is. It's just the best tool that, and I describe it as it unlocks potential. And people think it's some kind of technique and it's from some kind of book, but you've heard it here, and my builder was called Badger, and Badger, he said to me once, he was on site, and he said, we need to talk. He said, and I said, okay. And he said, we're having, just bear with me a second. Okay. Stuart, we're in, I'm in the kitchen. So if there's kitchen sounds, then
don't worry. Yeah, it's fine.
It's real life scenarios. Yeah?
Oh yeah, this podcast is very much like that.
Okay, right.
We've had recent episodes where Flo the dog has made an appearance in episodes, or my daughter quite often comes up and chats to me as well. So no problem.
Okay. Well, my pal here, Dexter, will probably want to make an appearance shortly as well. So back to Badger. So Badger, he says to me, he says, we need to talk, and I said, go and see the architect. And he said, the architects keep saying, we'll have a chat. And he said, I am sick of having chats, Jamie. When are we going to start having conversations? And that became the mantra on the building site. So if ever he called me and said, we need to talk, I'd say, is it a chat or is it a conversation? And if it was a chat, nothing had to be done. It was very relaxed. There was just no outcomes. It was just a little update. But if he said, we need to talk, and I'd say, is it a chat or a conversation? And he'd say, it's a conversation. That meant something had to be done. That meant everybody, if people around us heard it was a conversation, that meant everyone was tuned in. They knew it was going to be a different context. And nothing, Stuart, improves in sports or business or life unless people have very, very honest conversations, first of all with themselves and then with other people. And so whenever, because people say, how do you get that person to be so brutally honest with you within like 20 minutes? and you've never met them before.
Yeah.
And I tell them the Badger story. And then I say, we can either do a chat or we can have a conversation. Which one do you want to do? And they'll say conversation. And I'll say, are you sure? And they'll say, yeah. And I say, because if we have the conversation, it means we go really deep quickly. And, and then I say, I've no agenda. I can't get you a new promotion. My only role here is to get you to have the most honest conversation with yourself first. But here's why: because most of the time they've been having chats and they've been telling people what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And they've been not telling themselves the truth and the honest conversation. And so whilst they've been technically lying to themselves, if we want to put it in those frames, whilst they've been having chats with themselves, they then suffer with performance, whether that's in sports, whether that's in business, whether that's in life. So by the time they get to me, Stuart, I say, have you got time to chat? And they say no. I say, okay. And so what they do is they give us permission to be very, very honest. And that question for coaches, and it has to be set up the right way as well. If you just say, oh, there's a difference between chat and conversation, doesn't work. And I had a HR director of a global company in the city, and he said, this has gone round our business. He said, I have a chairman and a CEO who have performance conversations, but we've bred a culture of performance chats. And he said, it's gone round the business. People keep asking each other, is this a chat or is it conversation? It's conversation. Great. So then people know.
So circling back to Andrew, he arrived and the first question was about a conversation, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See, here's the thing. First of all, trust and faith. Yeah. He needed to put trust and faith in the people who had introduced us.
Yeah.
Secondly, we had to change the environment. And thirdly, it was he didn't have time to chat. And I kind of put that in front of him. Do you have time to chat, to tell me what you want me to hear? Do you have time to chat with yourself? Not at all. Okay. Let's go then. Let's go. And actually, and so, through that series, and I remember our first conversation, and I said, actually, you've brought Andrew to the ashes. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, Andrew's he's a great son, a great brother, a great cousin. But Andrew can't handle the Australians. How did he get out? And he said, a little edge. I said, how would Freddie get out? He said, he'd smack it to the boundary and say, go and catch it. I said, we need to call Freddie. and his eyes just lit up. And at that point, he'd reconnected with that part of him that was like he'd taken, and I often say this, is that Andrew, and being the son and being the friend and cousin, is who he is, and playing cricket is what he was doing, and that was the performer him. But he actually, people in life do this, is that they take one person into an environment, and if they do well, then great. They come out into life and everything's great, and dinner and the beer tastes great. But actually, there's many examples of leaving the real you behind and stepping into the sporting arena or the business arena as somebody else. And I made this example to him, and I said, have you ever heard of Eldrick Woods? And he said, no. And I said, you heard of Tiger Woods? He said, yeah. And I said, well, actually, Eldrick steps over a line and becomes Tiger. So he leaves the real him, outside of the sporting arena. I said, have you heard of Irvin Johnson? And he said, no. I said, he steps over the line and becomes Magic Johnson, the famous LA Laker basketball player. And I said, have you heard of Clark Kent? And he started laughing. And I said, yeah, he steps over the line and becomes Superman. But because he already had those two people, he had Andrew and he had Freddie. So he already...
What had brought him, what had, in that scenario, and I really get into the idea of, and I could see how he could connect with, I mean, in reality, it's not about inhabiting a persona. It's about reconnecting with the part of you that helps you perform, I imagine, that somehow has withdrawn inside of you because for some reason, another aspect of you is now more dominant, and I suppose we could get into the neuroscience of this if we really wanted to. But in its simplest terms, what it is an individual has essentially lost sight of the things, or the kind of, I guess the attitudes, the perspectives, and the kind of the way of them experiencing a situation. They've lost sight of the ways in which they can perceive that helps them with their performance. They're now perceiving it in a different way. And really what you're using is the whole difference between Andrew and Freddie is really a metaphor for that, isn't it? Exactly.
And we all have that. We all have that. And, Andrew, it's like, it's think about, what was your nickname when you were younger? What was your nickname when you were younger? And there are skills, qualities, abilities, mentalities around that nickname. And some can be really good and some can be really, really bad. But if you had an affectionate nickname that somebody called you, there's probably a reason for that. Mine in basketball, I had two. One of them was Glue Shoes. Okay, and Alton. Now, I've probably never told you that, but Alton used to call me Glue Shoes. He said I was the slowest black point guard he'd ever met in his life. Okay, now, so yes, I was Jamie, and then I was Glue Shoes, and I asked his wife, and it really bothered me because I asked his wife, and at the time, and I said, why does he keep calling me Glue Shoes? And and she said, just do the opposite. And I thought, okay, Glue Shoes, slowest black point guard, right? I've got to be quick. And so that was, but then some of my teammates still called me Glue Shoes. Yeah. And so it became affectionate. But then I remember coming back from high school in San Francisco, which was the high school Alton had gone to. And I came back one summer and he said, okay, I can't call you Glue Shoes anymore. Because I'd actually used that to my advantage. The other side to that is I also had another nickname, which was Silky. Yeah, and Silky, apologies for the.
It's all right.
So I'll just hold on there a second.
I can't hear it. You can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my other nickname was Silky, and again, silky, was I smooth? But it was really about how I dressed when I came out the locker room, and I was always sharp. And so we all have that in us. It's how do you tap into that? And there are in psychology, there's archetypes, which the warrior, the magician, the lover, the visionary. And if I think about, I'm just using Freddie as an example here. When you see graphic images of Freddie in that famous Ashes series, there was times when he accessed warrior. There were times when he was a magician with the ball, when he was the lover carer. That image of him crouched down with the Australian, I think it was Brett Lee. Yes. Do you remember the image?
Yeah.
Probably it kind of summed up that series, didn't it? So he was crouched down, had his arm around him. So at that moment, he was in lover carer. And then, there's that visionary in us, the king, the queen. And so we all have it, and we access it through it. This is where people always say, well, okay, psychology, it's in your head. But actually, the way you get into warrior, something will trigger it, and you will look different. You will move differently. And so it's always interesting if I say, okay, chat or conversation, right? Well, the honest conversation is, look at how you're sat. Look at how you're moving through your world.
Yeah.
You're not moving like, you're not moving like somebody who's ready to perform. So we've kind of zigged and zagged there, but I think the important part for me is you're never the same person for the same situation.
I think there's a really important point there. I just got a new book land on the mat, and it landed with a thump. It's a big book.
Yeah.
And it's the title is The Handbook of Embodied Cognition and Sports Psychology. It's a weighty tome, academic, and it's going to take me a while to wade through it. I was reading the introduction this morning, but it made me think of that, because to a certain extent, one of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast is the idea of perception and action, and the idea of a little bit as well. We talk a bit about this idea of embodied cognition, which is this whole theoretical perspective around the idea of the way in which essentially we used to think basically that everything's about the brain, and our actions are all governed by the brain, but actually embodiment, the way we're perceiving the environment is happening through the body physically and in a kind of socio-motor way as much as it is through the way we're perceiving through the brain. So the central nervous system is embodied. It's part of us, so we're engaging in lots of different ways. And from that perspective, that's actually really important, I think. And there's some interesting studies on this, which is around the idea of how we carry ourselves in terms of the way we physically act in the world actually has an impact on the way we can perceive information. And so changing, and you talk a lot about kind of changing perception, but a big part of that for you is physically changing the way you move and the way you therefore feel, which in turn has an impact on the way you perceive and therefore think.
Absolutely. And not just in sports, but obviously again it's the references back to sport. For most, and this is for your audience, most people come and engage with me because something's going wrong.
Crisis.
Yeah. And that will change, and that's my mission to change that in terms of, so it becomes more normalized, and we're not reacting. So you often hear me say, anticipate, don't react. So we're anticipate that it's going to happen, and so. But when somebody's looking through their eyes and they're not in the best mental state and things are not going well for them, you can look at your significant other through eyes. If your body language isn't great and you look at them, it will give you a different perspective than if you are, if you're in, let's say, magician mode. Yeah. So if you're in magician mode, and a magician, if you think physically with what you would do, like right now I'm in magician mode because I'm moving my hands a lot and I'm very visual, and, my head's up, and if I look at my kids and my partner and the world through these eyes, with this energy, with this body language, I'm going to see things differently. If I look through the world and my shoulders are slumped and I'm slouched, then I'm going to see the same situation very, very differently. And if I stand, tall and centered and breathe differently, then again, I can look at my significant other, my children, and the world very differently. And so you hear it all the time. Coaches say, body language, take charge of your body language. But again, for most people, it's just concepts. It's just concepts. And and for me, it's in what you would call applied learning. For me, it's, can you actually use it? And then give them, and here's a key point for, what I talk about at Train Brain is integration. And if you've got a pen, please write that word down, is integration. Integrating your point, your concept, your skill in one of three areas. In sports, give them the example in sports, give them the example with their career or business, and give them a life example as well. And when they can see it in all three, minimum two of the three, then what happens in their mind is they go, this is like that. And when the mind says this is like that, there is then a connection. And when that connection comes, it's when you've all experienced it, you go, that's it. And the skill of the coach or the performance coach is to be able to communicate in that way where they go, right, I've got it. And they might not be getting it in their world of sports, but if you give them the life example or the business example, then they get it. Let me give people a very real scenario. I had a client, successful business guy, came to me and he said to me, we were talking about his business, and he said, can you help me with my golf? And I said, sure, not a problem at all. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, just really not improving, not getting anywhere. And I said, what's your golf handicap? And he said, 24. I said, okay. I said, what's your business handicap? And he looked at me and paused with that look of, I know what you're talking about. I said, what's your business handicap? And he went, 5. And I said, I think you're being very modest. I think it's more like +5. Now, for those who don't know, +5 would be, your Rory McIlroy type standard as an amateur.
5 under par just to break even.
Just to break even, yeah. So by societal standards, in terms of business success, he was very successful. So I said +5. I said, if you played business with the same mindset that you have in golf, what would your business be like? He said, it'd be all over the place. I said, why is that? He said, well, in golf, he said, I make a mistake and I hold on to it. He said, I don't let go. I take it to the next round. I'm often afterwards annoyed and frustrated. I said, okay. I said, if you played golf with the mindset you had in business, what would your golf be like? He said, well, it'd be great. I said, why is that? And he said, well, because in business, you make a mistake and you immediately and then move on. And in that moment, he had the context of this is like that. And how can I take this from this environment in where I'm good mentally into another environment? And if we just talked about golf, there's no connection. And I really believe in terms of, if you think about it again, I hope there's, somebody once described this to me and said, you have to be able to communicate it in a way that the 10-year-old really, really gets. They also said, they said to me, I hope you're not from Barnsley. I said, no, I'm not from Barnsley. But they said, well, you have to describe it in a way that the lady from Barnsley gets it. And I said, oh, you can't say that. And I said, I'm from Yorkshire. Yeah. So I said, what he was really meaning is that you've got to say it in a way that people get it, and then they get it and they can apply it immediately. And I think very often in performance coaching, people can be saying things and communicating things that it's not just landing with them. And I think the real skill is to communicate it in a way that they get it, but also then you've got to give them the tool to be able to almost press the button so they can get it out.
Yeah, and it's like some cynical people, I think, see some of this stuff as kind of like, like parlor tricks, but I think there's an awful lot here, which is, you're talking a lot, I think, about metaphor, or you're talking about, like you say, accessibility or triggers. And so for me, the idea of like talking about, this is the same as that is a very easy way for someone to take an area where they have a particular way of acting that brings them, kind of what they perceive to be success, that often they're not bringing to a different environment. And actually, they're then very, very easily and quickly able to draw upon what it is that makes them successful in this environment, where they're at ease, comfortable, they feel they have expertise, etc., into another environment where maybe they don't have the same level of expertise, but they can still perceive the problem in the same way. And that's often one of the problems is that when somebody's out of their comfort zone, for example, and they don't readily have the answers at hand, they sort of lose themselves. Whereas actually, if they're able to draw from the, and we'll talk about tools in a minute, but if they're able to draw from the tools that they have in the other context where they feel far more powerful and efficacious, so to speak, then actually just bring the tools that you have there into this environment, use them to help you overcome whatever the hurdle or barrier is, and actually you can solve an awful lot of problems for yourself. So it's almost just that kind of metaphor of, I love the idea of, what's your business handicap? I just wrote down, actually, what's your coaching handicap?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Never thought about it in those terms, but it'd be interesting to find out, wouldn't it? What is your coaching handicap? Where do you think you are? And what can you draw from that environment? But
can I just add to that in terms of, the ability to take, what you use in one environment into another and use the skills and tools that you have. Very often, Stuart, you'll find that people do have the skills and tools, but it's not so much the skills and tools, it's the mindset and the attitude behind the skills and tools. So you can give your players, your people, the information, the resources, the tools, the ideas, but actually it's then the mindset and the attitude behind that. That's going to be what's going to be effective. I often say to people, you go, you've got the same environment, you've got the same resources, the same coaches, but one player or person will go to one level and another will go to another level. But they've got the access to the same resources. Well, if they've got access to the same resources, then it's the mindset behind using the resources.
But I like the way that the simplicity of this is so appealing for me, because
I know, but people think, I know, this guy's like,
too simple.
It's too simple.
But that's the beauty in many ways, because it's on the surface it's simple, but what also, for those of us at the coalface of this, we haven't always got opportunities for extensive conversations. Now, I'm not saying you don't have a conversation in order to arrive at this point, but the point is that what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to access some of these things readily and quickly, and because we're in the middle of it, we haven't. And you've made me think of the idea of this metaphor, right? So Sarah Keller, who was on the podcast about 4 or 5 episodes ago, she, with her group, people who understand performance understand this, right? They understand the need for this. So with her group of under 18 girls, so they're kind of elite players, she still wants to get them as a group to be able to access an attitude and a mindset that is going to enable them to perform at their best. And that group came up with this phrase, minty. That was their word, right? And they described themselves as minty. Now, that could well be, accessing magician or warrior or whatever it might be. But it was when we are minty, we're at our best. And they were able to access that and use that as an access point to describe them at their best.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what you're doing there.
Absolutely. And that's not rocket science, as in she's not giving them something really complex and saying, this is how this is working. This is how, this is when you say this word, this is because of this. She's saying, here's our trigger. Here's our tool. This is our word. And Minty gets them into the place where, as a group, collectively, they can be at their best.
Yeah. Now, let's just talk about tools a little bit, right? Because you describe yourselves as so, and this is where I really, really really resonate with what you're doing, because this is not about telling someone what to do. And I suppose we need to talk about doing and being as well. There's so many things to talk about. Anyway, but what's really interesting, let me just circle back to this, right? So I'd seen you present several times, and you talk about filling a room, right? When it comes to being on stage, when you switch into whichever persona it is that you switch in, which is Jamie on stage, 6'5", and filling a room, it's definitely something to behold. I recommend it to anybody, and it doesn't matter how many times you've seen it, and there's times when you've heard the same kind of ideas and concepts, it's still worth watching. Anyway, I've seen you present many times.
You make me sound like I'm like some comedian. You got to go to the Apollo and watch, and it's.
There's an element of that. There's an element of that in terms of our world. Yeah, I get that. But anyway, so when we go and see that, I've heard you talk, and I've bought into the ideas, right? The concepts.
Okay.
But it wasn't until we went on the retreat when I could properly experience them and then access some of the tools to bring those concepts to life in a very tangible and real way
Yeah.
that I was then able to access these ideas in a much deeper, richer, and more powerful way that then stayed with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think this is really important, because I think a lot of people think that if they know something because they've read it or they've seen it or they've heard it, that's enough. You have to go deeper than that, and you have to spend the time doing it. And I certainly can recommend that. So there's two things there, really. There's a bit about being and doing and being, and there's a bit about tools that I think we need to explore.
Okay. So I'm going to explore this first of all, in the in a very, in the interest of you, and this is like me and you just having a conversation, whoever's listening, whether there's any,
it's a conversation. I better get my notebook out. Sorry.
No, but I want to in the moment and in the interest of honest conversations, just share with how I'm feeling just listening to what you just said there. So I'm quite emotional just listening to what you're saying, because it's and this is a moment of vulnerability. There's lots of people who are probably listening to this, but what's touched me, it's triggered me, is because you've just said that yes, you can be in the room and you can listen, but actually you've got to go deeper. And I'm feeling quite emotional because getting an individual in a room to hear me, and it's not a show, that's who I am. And I'm very passionate about the next level for that individual. I don't care who it's with, is that you have to go deeper. You have to explore yourself. You have to find what it is, then to go deeper. And I think many people stop at that first stage, that first introduction. When you're in the room like we were, and when you've explored and come home and gone, I'm husband 2.0, and the impact that has in your world. Or I hear about, the coach who goes away and says, it's helped me communicate better with my family, or it's helped me get my job, or it's helped me in my personal life, and I can walk into work a completely different person. Then for me, that connection with that individual is much richer than the connection that they have with themselves. And so, I'm sharing this with you because I go back to that time with us, and it resonates that you personally, the impact that it had on your personal life, not because it was me, but because you have gone deeper. You've looked at this situation, at yourself, at how you can apply it much different. So I know that's kind of off track, but I wanted to share that with you because people get excited about, oh, this is great stuff and I can apply it and I can use it, but actually you're just scratching the surface. You're scratching the surface there, and it's more what you've been able to do with this, and who you've been able to coach and touch and perform at work, at home, in your career. That is that that's the upside.
Oh,
not you. It's you being able to have that conversation with your relative.
It's an echo, right?
Yeah.
And the beauty, or maybe it's a ripple, I don't know. The beauty of it, I mean, I can't tell you how many lives that has touched. So via the things that I was able to, so you mentioned a minute ago, by the way, about, coming home and saying, I'm husband 2.0. The interesting thing about this, Jamie, right, it wasn't even an intentional act. It wasn't like I said to myself, kind of in my brain, right, I'm going to be this person now, or I'm going to do these things to make me a better person. It wasn't that, right? It wasn't a conscious thing necessarily.
Nope.
I came home different.
Mm-hmm.
I reacted differently to situations and moments. I had a different way of being. I was more present. I was more engaged. I was less distracted. I was more, and that wasn't a conscious thing. I wasn't trying to do that. That just happened.
Because trying is doing, Stuart.
Exactly. This is the point.
Trying is doing. And again, you read about doing and being and people, but it's trying to convince yourself.
Yeah.
It's, I'm going back to, a player that I've just recently helped, from a big club, we can say from Manchester United, and his worst game, he described it as, I'm trying to convince myself, because that's the doing. And we're trained, people are trained to do something. Everybody's trained to do something. And, and I often tell this story that when on the phone with Joe Hart, and he said to me, Jamie, I don't know what to do. Joe, do you know how to play in goal? Yes. Are you training hard every day? Yes. You already know what to do. The situation is asking you, who do you need to be? And so a young man from early age has been trained to do goalkeeper. You've been trained to do engineering. But who do you need to be? Those two worlds need to be integrated. And when people start understanding, okay, who do I need to be? What is that? Then you have those moments of, I can take this doing. By the way, you can't stop doing, because that's what moves the world.
Yeah.
You can be all you like. You can sit on a mat. You can tree hug. You can sit on top of a mountain and be as long as you want, but that is not going to move. It's not going to move your project. It's not going to move your world. It's not going to move your career. It's not going to move anything. So something has to be done. But when the mind has a crisis or a challenge, the default question is, what do I do?
What do I do?
What do I do? And then it says, I don't know. If we switch that, here's the takeaway. Switch these two questions around. You got a problem or a challenge. First question is, who do I need to be? Who do I need to be for my son? Who do I need to be for this crisis right now, this project? Who do I need to be? And then I need to be courageous. I need to be calm. I need to be excited. I need to be focused. And then what do I need to do?
Yeah.
And so I think the impact that I've seen, not just with you, but I've seen with many, is that turnaround of them. Who do they need to be? And when they're trying to convince themselves and trying to convince others, the other way to describe that would be they're trying to impress. Very often for a young person, I'll come in a room and they'll look me up and down with that, come on, impress me. Impress me. Now they're saying that because they're looking and they walk through the world and want to be impressed. But see, what happens then is when they're in their arena, whatever that arena is, then they feel this pressure to impress. So I say, well, what if you let go of the need to impress? Because people are watching you anyway. Because if you ask somebody what happens to your performance when you're trying to impress, does it tend to go up or down? For most people, they'll say it'll go down because they're trying.
Exactly, you're doing.
You're doing.
The minute you're trying to impress, by its very nature you're doing, and you're not. And if it stops you from being present and attending to the task at hand.
Yeah, and if there's a focus then on, okay, so what tools and skills do I need to be able to work on who I need to be? That's the exciting bit. That's the bit where, when I hear, whether it's yourself or whether it's, an elite performer in different contexts.
So one of the things I was going to ask you about, we talked about tools, and you've talked in the past around, particularly with young people, that one of your missions is to equip them, because your belief is that they're not equipped to deal with the journey of life. They haven't got the tools or the equipment, let's say, to navigate through not just life, but their careers or whatever it might be. So I just wanted you to expand on that a little bit more.
Okay, so think of it like this. I think for most adults, they've had experiences of life, career, sports, and the context of you've been there before.
Yeah.
And if you've been there before, you know what's going to happen. And so I often describe it as the mountain. It's like we're going up the mountain. And I had a father once say to me about his daughter, he said, Jamie, she's got to learn from experience. It's called life. And I said to him, it doesn't just work like that, learning from experience. I said, would you go up Mount Everest in your suit jacket? He said, no. I said, well, what you're doing is you're sending your daughter up the mountain called sports, called life, in a cagoule. I hope most of you know what a cagoule is, because I said that. I said that in London once, and they looked at me like, what's a cagoule? And I thought that must be a northern phrase then. So like a Mac, like a rain Mac. Yeah. So I said, you're sending your daughter up in a cagoule. And I said, so what she needs is a big North Face, big mountaineering jacket before she sets off on the journey. What's happening is she's getting halfway up the mountain and it's getting cold. And so we know up the mountain, this is the adult, this is the coach, this is the teacher. They know it's going to snow. They just don't know when. They know there's going to be a ravine. They just don't know when.
Yeah.
That ravine could be a career situation. That ravine could be a personal relationship situation. It could be a challenge with a friend, or it could be way down the road. But as an adult, a parent, a teacher, a guardian, you know these things are going to happen. And here's my question: what is in place for that young person to be able to deal with that before they even think that they need it?
Yeah. And
let's use a football academy example, so we can bring this back to sports. So something that happens in the world of football with a young player, they'll go from the under 18s to the under 23s, and maybe they'll go and train with the first team, and they'll be asked to go up a level. So they'll go up. This happens right across the land, and then they'll train with the first team. Everything's great, and then the day after, they'll be told, you're just staying with your under 18s today.
Yeah.
Okay. The reaction is don't feel loved, rejected. They go within themselves. They get annoyed. All kinds of words. I can't mention on here, but it's not good.
Yeah.
Now, this happens right across the land. So I asked the coaches, what do you put in place? And they say, nothing. I said, well, you've seen this happen every season, every year. This has happened for years and years and years. And so what I work with the young players that we anticipate, we don't react. We anticipate that this is going to happen. You're going to go and train with the first team, and the day after, they're going to say, you're not training with the first team today. How do we react to that? And we put things in place for them. So when it happens, they are not surprised. And that's part of going up that mountain. So there's a ravine come, they see it coming. Right. I've got the big North Face jacket. I've got the ropes.
Yeah.
I've got the ladders. And so, I'm very passionate about young people having the tools before they even think that they need them. And sometimes, people will say, "Oh, I don't need that now." And I say, "You don't need it yet."
It's interesting though, isn't it? You talk about people, to use the mountain metaphor that you just used earlier on. They say one of the things they say about Everest is it's not getting to the top that's the problem; it's to getting back down.
Exactly.
And your point there is a really a good one, isn't it? Because they've climbed a bit of the mountain, or they've got up to a different stage, but you've got to also give them the tools to be able to come back down again. Because then it's often the coming back down that gives you the results. Then go up to the next stage, and to go up to the next stage, rarely do you summit Everest in one go.
You don't. You've got to go in different directions, and the concept of anticipate, don't react came from a good friend who's former deputy commander of the SAS, and I asked him what is, he said, Jamie, we are not surprised when we're ambushed. We just don't know when we're going to be ambushed, but we are not surprised. Yeah. And that mentality. And so let's bring this back to a personal context. All the people listening have had things happen in their lives where they may have been surprised at.
Yeah.
Could be, divorce, could be something's happened to the family, some illness, something. Yeah. Did somebody prepare you for that, or was it you put it down to experience? But what would have happened if somebody would have said, this is what it potentially could happen?
But the beauty is that it's not always necessarily about anticipating the particular thing that could happen. It's actually the preparedness is having the resources at your disposal that you can use to help you deal with the particular experience. So using your example of ropes, right? If you fall down a ravine and you've got no ropes, you can't get out. Yeah. If you've got the ropes, you can help. You might be able to get out. You might not be able to, but you might be able to get out. Perhaps, So my point is, I think that's the key, isn't it? And that's why I think tools or resources or whatever it is we want to use the phrase to describe them. I think that's why it's so important, because they are, and it's a challenge that I've placed. We had a guy called Sam Jarman on the podcast a long time ago, and he talks a lot about the idea of, stuff that you'll be very familiar with, the idea of non-duality and this idea of, the ego and the self and how that gets in the way. And actually, once we can get over the idea of this idea to try, trying to impress and trying to always be considering others and all those sorts of things. Once we get rid of those sorts of things, our life can change. And I don't agree with him. I agree with the idea, right? But that's knowing, right? You need something that's
lots of people know stuff.
Exactly. So you need something that's going to help you to be able to, at the very least, begin to act on that, the doing, and then from that you can then it can become part of who being, right? But you need the tools to assist with the process of taking something you know and turning it into something that you can then utilize. Now, I'm looking around at the moment because Flo the dog is awake. It's one of those key moments where the toilet training is still happening. It's a very good coaching challenge having a dog, as you probably well know. So here we go. There you go. You can go outside and do what you need to do. There you go.
I love this.
Anyway, sorry, carry on. In the middle of my flow, but yeah, let's just expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's. I think most people know that there is a difference between knowing. There's a difference between doing, and there's a difference between being. And I think, in an hour, I'm going to go and sit down with a young woman who knows what to do, but she's got some real challenges. And what we're talking about here is, if for me, what comes up on this mountain is we're talking about then what you would call mental health, mental health and mental well-being. And, as you know, this is a very, it's very topical. I don't call it mental health. I don't call it psychology. And the concept of delabeling, where you take the label off something so it becomes something else, so people will look at it differently. It's like what we talked about at the beginning about performance. I don't call it psychology. I call it training. You train your body every day. You train your feet or your technique or your hands every day. And I ask people, how often do you train your brain? Well, somebody said the other day, Monday and Wednesday when on college days. And I said right, okay, so it's so we're calling it training. We're delabeling it. Group of students, just staying on this topic for a second. Group of students, I asked them, how many of you like revision? No hands went up. How many of you don't like revision? Hands go up. I said, stop calling it revision. What does your favorite film star or singer or sports star do? They train, they practice, right? Let's call it training for the exam, not revision. So that's a concept called delabeling. If I take the label off my laptop, it becomes just a normal laptop. If I put the label back on, it becomes this piece of fruit called an apple. Okay. So that's delabeling. So why is it important to delabel? Because people look, when you say to somebody, okay, they've got mental health problems or mental illness, or they will look at it very differently. And so if you give people tools before they even think that they need them, then it's not reactionary. They're not down the ravine, as you said, without the rope. I want the people who I come across to have the tools before they even think that they need them. Why do I need this big North Face jacket? Well, you don't have to put it on right now. It might be sunny, but take it with you.
Do you know what? I can bring to life the importance of having these tools. And it's a very, very prevalent, because it's a very recent experience with somebody very close to me who was having essentially, a very, very difficult time with a range of different issues. And I was in a position where, beyond like love and support, I think I was called upon, in an effort to support that individual. Now, one of the things, I could have done in that situation is kind of just be there, right? And that would have had its own value. But also in an effort to help somebody to come through this challenge and this experience, and to at least begin to take steps. They're in a ravine, right? So, so at least to begin to one thing I could do is I could throw a rope down, right? Climb up this rope. Problem is, they might have got out the ravine, but it wouldn't stop them falling back in again necessarily, and it wouldn't help them to get out the ravine for themselves.
Yes.
So what I needed to do was I needed to have a situation where I helped them to, for example, kind of understand how they can use a rope and to almost have their own rope, if you like, to help themselves climb out of this ravine. Or maybe it wasn't about rope, maybe it was about giving them some ways of looking at the ravine that actually said it's not a ravine I can't get out of, it's actually a ravine if I work this way and work that way I can actually climb my way out of. But they still needed to climb their way out of that themselves, and there was no way I was going to be able to. I didn't even have a rope. Let's say I'm going to help you climb out of this ravine. I can't climb out for you because I'm up here and you're down there.
Yeah.
So now the only way I could do that was to have some resources at my disposal that could help that individual to discover various ways of looking at this problem, this ravine that they were in, this depth. And I used tools, I used resources from you on that journey, actual practical resources, things like I'll label them best and worst, I call them, right? I used what I call the three balls, and you call the lenses. But anyway, and we'll talk about those another time. That's for another podcast. The point is, without that, and also not just that, I had to be a certain way.
Yeah, and
right? In that
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah,
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, it wasn't just about what I did.
No.
It was also how I had to be, and I had to evaluate that and consider that, look at it through a particular lens. Now I can be a certain way, so I knew I had to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And this took all of me, right? To be this.
Because the magnitude of the scenario, Stuart, and for those listening, this isn't about elite performance, and this is like real world shit right now. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're talking about the superstars that I work with, we're talking about real world situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where I don't care whether you've won the Champions League or whether you've done this or that. We're talking about, can you help that person in your inner circle? Do you have, and it wasn't the tools. Yes, you had the tools, but it was who you needed to be, Stuart Armstrong. In that moment, you cannot help that person without you being a certain way.
But I couldn't have accessed a way of being. I could have gone into that on autopilot, and you did it. But the lens through which I was able to look at that problem was derived from the idea of train brain, the conceptualization of how I might even just consider how I should be.
Yeah.
A lot of people wouldn't have even thought, how do I need to be here?
Yeah.
What is the situation? Asking me not to do, to be. Yeah. Now, from the being came the doing.
Yeah.
Because there was some things we needed to do, but I had to be something differently. Now, also the response from that individual, right? Who you've got an emotional connection to, and of course, when you've got an emotional connection to somebody, that can often present its own challenges because emotions get often in the way of. You can have a conversation with somebody in a very dispassionate way because. There isn't necessarily the emotional connection always. And so the honesty can be very different. Whereas sometimes with the people that you're closest to, it's hard to overcome some of that. So that required also a different level of being.
The interesting thing here is that it's very easy for people to say, I don't have the resource, I don't have access to the resource. Why are you making me so emotional? This is I just recently gave a couple of talks at St. George's Park for the FA, and I remember a coach saying, I always struggle when I know I'm with a player, kid, or whoever it is, and there's a moment where he said, I think I haven't got the resource I need the psychologist in at that point, and our club doesn't have that resource. And I said, that's the moment, my friend, that it's asking you to be the resource. What you need is, it's asking you to be the resource. You have, it's that accessing in himself. But then what do I say? Or do I have the tools? And a player that I was with last night who, this guy can play. He plays in the championship. I mean, he can play. And he said to me yesterday, he said, my grandfather, who's 80 years old, he said, has been told he's depressed and he's caring for his wife, which is the lad's grandma. And he said, through our work, he said, I have been able to help my granddad. And I said, that is music to my ears.
Yeah.
That is what it, and folks, I'm going to say this, right? Even at 80 years old, this man has been told, you need to take things, you need to take pills, you need to change his mindset. Let's call them antidepressants. Yeah. And this player said, he's like, Granddad, no, you don't need to take those. He said, and then he started polishing Dad's memories. He started polishing that and asking him, what's it like, Granddad, when you were this, like when you were that? And he started asking him, and his face started lighting up. And he said to him, he said, Granddad, he said, just out of interest, because that's the phrase that I always use. He said, out of interest, Granddad, he said, do you feel depressed now? And his granddad had this big smile on his face. He's telling me this yesterday in the cafe, and he's like, no. He said, right. He said, Granddad, it's what are you thinking about all the time? He said, you need tools. And this is where I say it's the inner circle. Your biggest impact with this is with your own inner circle. Your own inner circle. And if you can help your own inner circle, and by the way, yes, people are going to say, oh, there's professional help needed here, and there's certain things. Like I said, I'm going to see an 18-year-old girl in about in less than an hour, and her mum, she said, I can't do this. Now, that's not that she can't do it; it's that mum's she's not got tools. I've recently been working with people with cancer survivors, cancer sufferers. And the woman who asked me, beautiful lady called Amanda Winwood. And Amanda said to me, she met me in a business training. She was in a room in a business training, and she said, would you come and speak to this group of cancer survivors? And I said, Amanda, please tell me, what is my work going to do for those people? She said, believe me, it's going to. So I go to Newquay, Stuart, and it's the most humbling thing I've ever done. And she said, one of the women said, she said, this is great for me. She said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to have some honest conversations with my family. We've been having chats. Yeah. Amanda then said, can I bring my daughters to see you? And I said, yeah, I have an event for girls, Strut Camp, about. She brings her daughters, one kicking and screaming, and one was like, yes, let's go. She said, transformed the family. But more importantly, Amanda sat at the back of the room and said, I need these tools. Who's giving me these tools to be able to pass on to my daughters?
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think my life's work is getting people to think about this in a way that is, I need this before I start the journey on the mountain, or as I go on the mountain. What are the tools that I need? Not get up the mountain and think, oh my God, it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a coach, a parent, a teacher, whether you're a professional athlete, and I guess, Stuart, we've worked together in many different contexts. My passion comes from this because I see it applied in different areas. The many Premiership footballers, not because the Premiership footballers, I don't get excited because of that. It's because they're men who I'm interested in. I'm more interested in the fact that they're men, young men, and then how they apply it outside of football, and then they can apply it in football. Their football goes to another level.
Mm-hmm.
But you've seen this applied in many different contexts. Oh, this is
Flo the dog.
Look at you, Flo. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
My daughter called her Flo, but FLO, but I obviously call her Flo FLOW because obviously I'm interested in flow.
It keeps you in flow. That's why.
Flow, exactly. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
So, my interest is young man, young woman, businessman, businesswoman, whoever you are. My interest is, can you apply this I'm more interested in you applying this outside of your professional arena. And when you can apply it outside of your professional arena, you can then apply it also in your professional arena and integrate the two. As the head teacher said to me once, he said, you've made me think about this. I'm creating this great environment at work and I'm great at engaging with students and staff, and I've got great energy for my students and staff. And I'm always evolving at work and make great decisions. That's, I call this the 5 E's, economics decisions. He said, but when I get home, I feel drained. Like after a day at work, I feel drained. I just want to sit down on the sofa with a glass of wine. And his words, he said, my family are being shortchanged. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, if I just want to sit down and collapse on the sofa, he said, I've just spent all this energy and engaged with people in work, and then I get home and I want to collapse. He said, that's shortchanging my family. He said, I need to go again. And so then for him, it was, I need to add something, develop something that I can, in that life column, I can be metaphorically aspiring to be world class.
Yeah. Not
just in my business and my career, but also in life as well.
So that's something that's really important, I think, and I want to just talk to you a little bit about the impact. And at the risk of making this a kind of train brain Jamie Edwards infomercial.
No.
I'm happy to do so. I mean, I genuinely am, because one of the reasons I wanted to get you on here was I set up this podcast deliberately, right? Because I wanted to be able to just provide the kind of experiences that I've had to others, some of the knowledge I have to others, in an effort to enable them to be able to benefit from some of the things that I've had. And, you know, you've been a huge influence on my life, and it's only fit and proper that I put that out there. So I'm unashamedly going to be doing this in a promotional way, I guess. But the point I want to make is this. So the impact for me personally on my career, my life, my relationships, the way I coach, the way I interact, has been profound, right? But the biggest thing, and the thing that I have the deepest gratitude for, is how it's enabled me to help others. And that's the bit that I didn't necessarily fully grasp to begin with. And it really, so telling that story I told earlier on, that what brought it home for me was that moment, because I was able to draw on things that I almost didn't know were there. They are. You know, they were there, and when needed, they came. I was able to, you know, and I didn't do anything for this individual necessarily. I didn't get them out the ravine. All I did was be with them in a way and offer them some ways of looking at the problem that they were in, that then allowed them to climb out of the ravine. They did all the work.
Yeah.
And that is so powerful. And that's the bit I would say, you know, if there's, you know, I mean, I doubt anybody could be listening to this for the 2 hours we've been talking and be thinking, oh, I'm not really sure. And if they are, then that's fine, you know.
Well, Stuart, you're back to trust and faith.
Yeah.
You're back to trust and faith. I'm not sure. That's okay. But there are times when you've had a leap of faith and trust in somebody that you didn't need to know everything. And so what's interesting here, because I made a note of it earlier on, and you know, it's not an infomercial for me, but it's interesting. I wrote earlier, selling, and a big question mark, because there was, I gave a talk at, and you've been in many different ones, and the feedback to the stakeholder, the sponsor, was that we felt that he was selling something, you know. And I had to kind of, you know, I had to take the feedback, which, you know, was good feedback, and I said, I then, because this gentleman does know me like you do, and he said I would never have, you know, put that into that, you in that category, and respecting the organization, respecting the audience. If I wanted to sell something, I'd be saying, come to this, here's this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then I was like, everybody is selling something.
Yeah. To sell is human, as Dan Pink's book says.
Yeah. Everybody is selling something to somebody. And if you're a coach, you are selling your philosophy. You're selling your philosophy to your players. If you're a coach, you're selling yourself to your stakeholders, or your sponsors, or the parents. If you're, you know, if you're a father, you're selling yourself to your children. Yeah. So then I was like, well, you know, okay, I get that. And I'm going to look at, you know, was there something in that presentation that he felt that? But then I thought, that's more about the belief that he has than am I selling?
Yeah.
And then I thought of you, and I thought, if Stuart Armstrong, if I have not communicated and been Jamie Edwards and been passionate the way I am, and said, this is how this works, this is where it works, this is how it works, then Stuart Armstrong doesn't get to go home and his wife says, something different about you, husband 2.0. And if I hide behind, I don't want to sell this to this group, then there's somebody in that audience who doesn't get the message and cannot take that message on.
Yeah. And
so,
sell away, James. Sell away.
Yeah. Well, I'm selling. You know, listen. This is what I say to the players. Some managers and coaches might not just be having you. They're either good, you know, you might be the best player you can be, and you might not fit into their system. So there's no amount of impressing that's going to put you in that team. So you might be having me, you might not be having me. It might work for you, it might not work for you, but I don't need you to say, you know, I want to, you know, you need to come. Not you need to come, you need to believe. There's nothing to come to, you know. There's nothing to come to. There's you know I do things, but you know, if I'm interested in the likes of you or the player I was with yesterday who, you know, he says, I'm interested in this because it helps me help my granddad. Helps me be a better player, but it helps me help my granddad. And when they say, can you sit down with my son or my daughter, or, well, I want you to have the tools so you can also do that.
Now, so knowing that you've got to go and listening to Flo the dog beginning to tear apart my house, that probably brings us to a nice kind of close, 2 hours into the conversation. And I know we could go on because we can.
We will.
But we will. Listen, I've massively appreciated you taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to come and talk to me. And I know there is more to talk about, which we will obviously do, and I make that promise to the listeners now.
I think we need a part 2 or 3
well, that's fine.
That has some specifics.
Yeah, we can get there. But the first stage, but anyway, so as I always say, people might be interested. I'm almost certain that the people who listen to this podcast do so because they're committed. You know, they're full on people. They're not. They want to do it differently. They want to do it better. They want to make an impact on young people's lives. They want to guide them on the journey and all that sort of stuff. So I'm certain there's going to be interest. I know I'll get requests. So just purely selfishly, so that I don't have to redirect people to you, how can people find you?
Okay, so you can find me first of all on my website, which is trained-brain.com. That's the minus sign in the middle. You can get me on social media. Instagram is a great one, and I'm also on Twitter, but I'm not as Twitter-esque as you are, Stuart. And probably more importantly is you'll probably find my phone number, and the best thing to do is to actually call me. So, you know, that's probably one of the best ways. So Instagram, Twitter, send me a message, but you know, I much prefer a conversation and than anything. And then, you know, what I'll do is there are some ways, and that in the very near future, that if anybody listening wants to, you know, come and experience what Stuart experienced on the retreat, there's also going to be some dates coming up in the very near future as well. And I will make sure that for Talent Equation listeners, then there are, you know, we can make sure that that you get an incentive to come and experience that. But the best thing about that whole experience for me, Stuart, is that it's really cemented our relationship. So, and I've seen you go and do the work that you've done, not just from your coaching, because I know you're a great coach, and not just from your business career in sport development and your head of coaching role, but also I think what touches me more is the scenarios where you have been able to genuinely help somebody and others in situations where, quote unquote, they would have needed some other type of help, and you've been the person who can help them. And I'm going to say this to all of you, is that you don't need a piece of paper to justify helping somebody and having the skills and the tools to do that. My mission is, I have an 11-year-old daughter who, I see her one day having a whole, school bag of tools to be able to help people. She's already saying to me, Dad, we need to speak. And it's a conversation, not a chat. At 11 years old, that is a cause set in motion. Yeah, that's a cause set in motion. She doesn't have to be a certain age, and she doesn't need a piece of paper to be able to ask the right questions and to be able to help.
Jamie, thank you for your time. And I know you're busy doing, there's not enough hours in the day. There's not enough people in the world that are asking for your support, and and fitting it all in is a big challenge. But like I said, I'm massively appreciative for your time and all the stuff that you do, and I'm looking forward to the next time we can have a conversation.
Yeah, and enjoy the weekend, and I look forward to us catching up very soon.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. Fantastic conversation. It's a long one, sorry about that, but we just couldn't stop once we get going, and it's taken me so long to get him on. I just thought I'm going to make the most of this opportunity, and then the time was just flying by, and the next thing I knew, we're 2 hours in and we had to try and stop things. I mean, there's a couple of, there's so much, it's so dense, it's so hard for me to actually pick anything out of that. But just one of the things that really just kind of brings it back to me is this idea of chats or conversations just all the way through, just thinking all the time, are you having a chat, having a conversation, are we going to have an honest conversation, are we going to get to the actual point of this? The idea of the metaphor or the psychological archetype, and actually creating almost like affectionate nicknames for people based on their characteristics. I remember a guy I once selected for a team who'd come out of one of the lower teams, didn't have a lot of confidence, and I called him the Glove because he was so amazing at marking people and sticking really close to them, and it built his confidence, and it really one of those things that I've always utilised throughout my career. And this idea of the way that we can manage our state and live in a live in a certain way by the way we the way we carry ourselves, that kind of embodiment concept. And then the other one that really jumps out to me is this idea of delabeling. And I really took away this idea that confidence is really just a way of perceiving information. that's sent to us by the world. And actually, we can interpret that information in different ways, and it's just the way that we look at it, and the lens through which we look at that information that determines how we might react to that. So there's really a lot to work on with that, and I like this idea of like reframing, delabeling, or adding an idea to a particular way of being or acting. Hope you enjoyed. Now, we have conversations like that all the time in the Conclave, my mastermind group. There's a fantastic group coming together. And we never know who's going to turn up month to month, but we do have these gatherings. We get together online and we have a great conversation. And a few people are a bit busy and they're not able to attend, and they've said that they're going to give up their places. So if you're interested in joining the Conclave, head over to the website, click on the Become a Patron button. You'll see the option to join the Conclave. You'll get an email from me as quickly as I possibly can to let you know when the joining details are. We're meeting on the first Monday of every month, usually in the evening. I'm going to set up a breakfast club version as well for people who are further afield in different time zones. So you've got an option of one on an evening GMT or one early morning GMT, because I'm usually at my best in the mornings anyway. So anyway, if you want to join, get on board. It'd be great to have you with us. There's a lot of meaty stuff going on, and even if you can't attend, I'll send you the video, and then you can watch the discussions at your own leisure. It's like having kind of an extra bonus monthly podcast. So anyway, looking forward to hearing from you. Have a great week of coaching. Remember, ditch those drills.